Again, I run the Team Guitar Institute at the IDC, and my talk is going to look at the another sort of view of this disability. So I want to start off with a story. What really got me into this particular issue. Around a year ago or so, there was a lot of sort of upheaval in California, where the sort of the granola crunchers were really concerned about MMR vaccinations, measles, mumps, and rubella, and they were en masse not vaccinating their children. In response to that, a really interesting woman wrote an article. This is the article where she sort of said, this is really horrible because these people are putting their children at risk for death or morbidity or something because they don't want to be like me. I am a highly this woman is a highly functioning autistic woman, and she's saying, rather than people be like me, they'd rather put their children in harm's way. And that, to me, was sort of like a really sort of interesting sort of idea, a different way to see disability from the disabled's perspective. And along those sorts of lines, there's a lot of people in the disability community that see sort of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or genomic technologies that look to prevent your unborn child from having a disability. They see it as somewhat of eugenics. So there's different mindsets in terms of how people perceive disability or the efforts to get rid of disability. This is an American picture. I got off the internet. Okay. So now that I've given you the story, I just want to step back. I want to say, because I have a podium or a bully pulpit, as one of my presidents would have said. I run the Institute for Legal Implications of Emerging Technologies at the Merkaz Ben-Tchumi and the IDC Herzliya. And we're really keenly interested in all these sorts of issues, sort of the legal and the ethical implications of new and emerging technologies. And we work on all these sorts of areas on autonomous vehicles, robotics, genomics, artificial intelligence, Bitcoin, big data, virtual reality, the whole shebang. It's all very interesting to us. And I'm more than willing to talk to anyone here who shares these sorts of interests, and I'd love to create collaborations. Okay, so now back to what I was talking about. There's a technology, and I'll get into it for a little bit. There's the ability there's multiple technologies. And a lot of these technologies are used more so in Israel than a lot of other developing nations or developed nations, however you want to perceive this country, to screen for Down syndrome, which is highly screened here in some populations and on others. And sort of these are sort of the responses. Would the world be a better place without people like my daughter? And people talk about Mozart and his sort of disabilities, and where would he be without his disabilities? Stephen Hawking, where would he be without his disabilities? And I think you mentioned this as well, that you had said, my disabilities gave me a gift. I would like to now give it back. Keep the gift, but give back the disability. But so a lot of people sort of talk about these sorts of things. So my concern, and again going back to this woman with autism, was that the deaf, high-function autistic, Asperger's, I guess autism and Asperger's are now sort of mixed in one sort of spectrum, dwarfism, cystic fibrosis, celiac disease, Down syndrome less so because I guess they're fertile. But sort of this disability populations, what would happen? People who take particular pride for very good reasons in their disabilities, what happens if they employ artificial reproductive technologies to have children with disabilities? Something that's legal in most jurisdictions. So the concern is that all geneticists will love that picture. It's very funny. It's funny if you're a geneticist. Right? Do I have to explain? No, we got to. Okay. So in many countries, reproductive autonomy is nearly inviolable. So should we tell parents that they can't have a disabled child and so there's a lot of sort of fuzzy lines there. The ability to reproduce is a basic human right. I mean, it's what makes us alive. On the flip side, particularly, so my training is as a U.S. attorney, so I'm going to look to some U.S. law here. But parental rights vis-a-vis their children is not absolute. So children ought to be protected, at least as society, at least as Israeli society, American society. We think that children should be protected from the capricious sort of whims of their parents. So it's a sort of a two-way street. They have very sort of broad rights in terms of reproduction, but but we try to couch those and cabin those in terms of what they can do to their children. So to give you some examples, before I give you some examples, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the state of the art in genomics, just to some little more introduction. I got these. This is the SULAB in Scripps. These are the genomes that we're sequencing. This is the state of the art in technology. We're approaching 1 million sequenced genomes in the next 10 or so years. The sequencing explosion, sort of the tools that we have to do what I'm suggesting. Here is Moore's law, right? Everyone's familiar with Moore's law. That's the doubling of computational power every 18 months. It sort of fluctuates. Moore's law was really not Moore's, whatever. And for all those in computer sciences, you know that Moore's law is totally blown out of the water, not by CPUs, but by GPUs in the area of deep learning. We spoke about deep learning earlier today. So the cost of sequencing has gone down, and we mentioned this earlier today, $1,000 per genome. Whether or not that's a loss leader is another sort of issue I'm not going to get into. But given all this state of the art that we have, I think the next cartoon is very important. And again, I blew it up because most people can't read it. Obviously, we have a patient here. It's nothing a few stem cells, technology that we have today, another 75 years of research can't fix, right? So we have all this great technology in genomics and in sequencing and in reading and in writing and in editing and CRISPR and all that sort of stuff, but our understanding of the underlying genomics, 2% of, we're pretty low in terms of what our global understanding of genetics. We sort of mentioned it this morning in terms of whether or not we can predict disease and those sorts of things. So this technology, this understanding, this knowledge all comes to play in this particular question that I think is very interesting from a legal and ethical sort of standpoint. Again, stop me if I'm talking too quickly. I tend to talk quickly because I listen to books on tape in 1.5 speed. There's not enough time. So here's an example of a sort of simple sort of disease. This is sickle cell anemia. Another sort of crazy issue because we're allowed to test for it and even discriminate on the basis of being a carrier of sickle cell disease in some areas of society, which is really interesting in and of itself. But here, it's a simple sort of mutation that we know. It's one base pair, normal, abnormal, normal, mutant, whatever sort of terminology you want to use. Sick, healthy. This is sort of the standard sort of how we think of genetic mutations. Okay, and we can look for these genetic mutations in your unborn child, right? We can take, this is PGD in its most simplest sort of form. We can take a 5-day-old or 7-day-old blastocyst, a whole bunch of cells. We can suck out one of the cells. Really cool if you want to see it happen. And we can do a sort of genomic analysis on an individual cell. It won't hurt the baby. It's been done for years. We can find out whether or not this baby will have a disease like sickle cell. We can do it for all these sorts of diseases. Sort of simple sort of Mendelian mutations that we can look into. Am I getting it wrong? Oh, it's been a while. Okay. There are a lot of complex genetic disorders. So this is asthma. Asthma is a very complex genetic disorder. We don't really know what there are intrinsic factors, extrinsic factors, maybe multiple genes. I think there was a discussion earlier of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia I was working on when I was in the lab, and we had a 10, 20, 30 sort of potential genes, and it's a sort of multifactorial sort of disease. So something like this is very sort of hard to figure out whether or not your little Timmy is going to get this in the little embryo. One of these diseases, much more likely, not all of them are diseases, but whatever. Some of these sorts of things a lot easier to see in your unborn embryo. Hank Greeley at Stanford. We see this. It's not us. It's the End of Sex. This is a book. There's a secret meeting. I spoke to him last week, and he actually said there's a secret meeting. Anyone read the book? It's a great book. Secret meeting in the title. I don't know if it's worth it. But whatever. He sort of says that we're going to use technology in use today, available today, where you can take skin cells, extract skin cells. They've done it with mice. Extract skin cells either from a male or from a female. Turn those skin cells into stem cells. Turn those stem cells into sperm, egg. Put them together. You got a baby. You can have same-sex couples have biological children. You can have single people have biological children. You could have mix it up, have the man give the egg and the woman give the sperm. All possible with in mice, soon to be possible in humans. And of course, science. If anyone sort of familiar with the way that the media perceives science, they blew it out of the water. Scientists turned mouse skin cells into egg cells and made babies. Right? Really sort of exciting. But this is the state of the art. This is what we can do. Why am I telling you all this? Because Hank Greeley, in his book, The End of Sex, sort of implies that next 20 years, so stepping back, PGD, full disclosure, I have 3 IVF children, so I appreciate sort of the nature of having a blastocyst and taking out a cell. It's painful, it's complicated, it's expensive, it doesn't always work. So a lot of people, this technology where you can look at a single genetic mutation in your unborn embryo, is not available to them for a whole slew of reasons. Hank Greeley, again a professor at Stanford Law and of genetics, sort of suggests that in 20 years from now, that whole thing is going to be blown out of the water. You can make 1,000 embryos, by just taking skin cells, and you can look at all those embryos, check which Timmy you want, or which Tommy you want, or which Tamara you want, whatever you want. You pick out the embryo you want, and you've got the child you want, without sort of all of the sort of aggravation and the cost of IVF. Of course, you throw CRISPR into the loop, and now you sort of do lots of stuff, even more complicated. Okay, again, stepping back. We have the technology today, or in the next 10, 15, 20 years, to create the child that you want within bounds. Every year, those bounds get wider, but there is that sort of potential to create the child you want. And the question is, are there parents, and are there parents out there that will create a child that they want that may not be in that child's best interest? And when I told my mother about this, she thought I was crazy. Why would parents do that? Turns out it's been done. There was a famous case in New York. A lesbian couple wanted to have a deaf child. They were deaf. They wanted a deaf child. They selectively selected a deaf sperm donor, and they had a deaf child. There are people. I'm not the only person. There are other people that sort of written on this sort of area. There are people that will want a child with their particular disability. So here's 2 papers on it. And then there is some statistics. Again, these statistics are really hard to come by. If you appreciate the nature of artificial reproductive technologies in the U.S. and in a lot of Western countries where it's more of a business, or it's a lot of a business. It's medicine, it's an art, it's also a business. Data like this is really hard to come by. There's one paper that I've only found out there where they say 3% of all pre-implantation genetic diagnosis done on IVF babies is for detrimental purposes, to find what, and again, the terminology is all convoluted and the information is all convoluted, but there is some small section of people that are doing this, or maybe be doing this, and this is a concern to me, or should be a concern to some of us, hopefully, or at least I think it should be. And again, maybe I'm wrong. So stepping back, looking at sort of I'm a geneticist by training, I'm also a lawyer by training. So U.S. law, parental rights are not absolute. There is a Child Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Act. Courts have stepped in where they find that parents are abusing their child. Buck v. Bell, a horrible sort of Supreme Court case way back when. Those who don't know, Buck v. Bell, Oliver Wendell Holmes, a giant in the legal world, sort of said that we can have compulsory sterilization of people that are unfit. Still good law. No one really considers it good law, but it hasn't been overturned. So again, the court will step in where it sees that the parents may be doing something wrong for the child. Both of these are, statutory and case law. Another famous case, Prince v. Massachusetts in 1944. Parents may be free to become martyrs themselves, but it does not follow that they are free to make martyrs of their children. This is good old Judge Wiley Rutledge sort of said that this doesn't have anything to do with genetics. It's about a religious cult that wanted their children to sell religious literature, and the court sort of said you can't force your children to do those sorts of things. Renslow v. Mennonite Hospital, 1977. There is a right to be born free of parental injuries foreseeably caused by a breach in duty. So this sort of suggests that parents have a duty not to cause their children any sort of harm upon birth. Okay. So this is a really hard movie to watch. Avert your eyes if you want to. There is a legal concept called wrongful life. It used to be available in Israel up until 2012. I recently found out the law is still available in Israel to some people who are grandfathered in. So it's still good law in Israel. It's really only good law in New Jersey, for the most part, because it's a crazy state to begin with. The law sort of says that a child can sue its parents for being born. And courts have to do these crazy contortions. I got a picture of a contortionist. They have to do these crazy contortions because the court has to basically look at the child and say, you are better off dead. You are better off not being born. And that's something that the courts are loath to do, except in New Jersey. And it's something that the courts are really hard. It's a huge burden on the court to sort of weigh the life of the child dead or disabled. And courts don't want to do that, except in New Jersey. And again, there's issues calculating the damage, and going back to what I had spoken to at the beginning, people in the disabled community see this as horrible. You're essentially saying that all people with my similar disability are better off dead. That's what the court is saying in these sorts of cases. Okay, so moving along, I'd like to suggest that wrongful life is a horrible sort of cause of action in the legal sort of sphere. Again, unless you're in New Jersey. But overall, I think there should be, given the power of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, and I've hopefully explained it to a certain degree, and the power of technology, where we're heading in terms of the ability to really create thousands of embryos, and you can choose any one of those thousands of embryos. It's not really sort of designer children, but it's picking the exact child you want. And as a parent myself, the anxiety of picking one embryo and then not knowing whether I should have picked the other embryo will kill me. But people will do this. So, basic bioethics first principles, some sort of Latin phrase. Don't make anything worse. So, I really think that there should be a sort of legal cause of action to prevent people from making things worse. And again, the convoluted sort of problems with this are manifold, and I'll lay them out for you. Let's say I want to say that I would argue that parents shouldn't be allowed to use artificial reproductive technologies to create a child who is deaf. Does that mean that deaf parents can't have children? They can't reproduce naturally? I mean, no one's going to step in and say deaf parents can't have children. So, drawing a line and saying deaf parents can have children naturally, but they can't have children via artificial reproductive technologies that they make sure they'll have a deaf child, that's a really hard line to draw, and I acknowledge that. Another sort of issue, oh wow, 5 minutes. But I started off with the Hershey Kiss. Okay, fine. Okay, I think one of the problems is, what is an actual disability? Who's going to be able to go to the court and say, I am disabled? Right, and again, the disabled community is even the term disability or non-able or disabled, it comes to all these sorts of things. And you would say, well, no one's going to step in and say what a disability is and what isn't, because it's a minefield. And no one's going to go into that minefield, especially risk-averse attorneys. But we've done it. The ADA, the law that doesn't seem to apply in Israel because there's no ramps going onto the sidewalks for some reason. But in the U.S., the ADA applies, defines what a disability is. So perhaps we can use a definition that's already existed in the law. I would argue, though, look to the market. Look for disabilities that people are trying to cure. If someone's trying to cure something, it's probably something that we could call a disability. If no one's trying to cure it, for the most part, it's probably not a disability. Again, caveats. There are orphan diseases. I worked with a lot of drug companies that worked with orphan diseases, and I appreciate that there are orphan diseases out there that unfortunately people don't care about. But I think the market is a good place to look. And again, I only have 5 minutes. I also think that, stepping back. Anyone here a lawyer? No? Not too many. Okay, Torts Illustrated. Not Sports Illustrated, Torts Illustrated. What's a tort? A tort is duty, breach, causation, damages. You have a duty to someone, you breach that duty. As a result of that, you've caused some sort of injury, and there are damages. As a result, tort. Everyone here has now gone to law school. So here's a huge question that I'm grappling with. Who do we owe a duty to? Do we owe a duty to the unimplanted embryo? who are we damaging? Where are the damages coming in? Is the damage coming in when I implant one embryo? What if I didn't implant that embryo? Then I would have implanted a different embryo. Are they people? Are they persons? Religious issues, sort of morality issues. Again, very sort of complicated, and I only have like 3 minutes now. So again, even if you can create a duty to an unimplanted embryo, I would argue that the best way to do it is to say, and again, we've got that contortionist. Don't say there's a duty to the embryo, there's a duty to society. We have a duty to society to not create extra costs on society. And again, so that sort of takes the burden and the onus off of the child itself and off of the embryo itself, but it sort of puts it on society. And I also sort of think that co-conspiring health professionals with the deep pockets are also sort of a good target for this sort of cause of action. And again, you don't want to look at the cost of of this particular child on society, the cost of the medicines and the technology that are needed to help this child, because again, what if the parent says, well, I'm dirty rich, I can afford to have a child with a disability. We also potentially want to prevent parents like those from having children with disabilities, or not. Again, my position versus your position. Not that I'm implying that anyone has, whatever. Okay. Again, going back to our beautiful equation, damages. Here's a contortionist again, right? Who is being damaged? Are they damaged? If I say that someone who has a disability is damaged, I'm essentially saying all the other people with those sorts of disabilities are also damaged. And now I'm sort of making assumptions and we all know what happens when you assume, right? That's the joke? No? Okay. Those who know, no. Okay. So making all these sorts of assumptions about a particular individual sort of raises all these issues about the community of individuals. So again, one of the issues I have to grapple with is how to deal with, who is damaged, what's damages, how do you define these damages? Okay. Here's a nice Latin phrase. Latin for the Literati, great book. The take-home message from this phrase is, again, this issue of quitam. Quitam is sort of a whistleblower, sort of a cause of action. Snowden. Snowden's a whistleblower. He got in trouble. Some whistleblowers get in trouble. Some whistleblowers are loved by the state. Some whistleblowers are hated by the state. But there are laws for whistleblowers. If I see something bad going on within the government, I only have 1 minute left, I can blow the whistle. Let's say someone's avoiding their taxes. I can blow a whistle on that person, and I can get all the benefits of those taxes that they're avoiding. I get a portion of it. So you would argue that, again, in my cause of action, again, only 1 minute left, in that cause of action, the child is a whistleblower. We're not sort of looking at his damages, we're looking at the damages to the state. And he is paid in as a whistleblower, not as a damaged child or a disabled child. Again, the lawyers may appreciate my jury instructions. So thank you. Thank you. These are my students, DL, IDC,